Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to understanding the biggest global shifts happening right now. Today, we're zeroing in on what is probably the single most important technology for the entire clean energy transition, the EV battery. Okay, let's just unpack this for a second. The whole global move to electric vehicles, it really stands or falls on these lithium ion cells, and one nation completely dominates. I mean, the manufacturing, the supply chain, the expertise. Think about this stat. China went from having only just two, EV battery makers in 2005 to now producing more than three-quarters of the world's lithium ion cells. That's not just growth. That is total market capture.
It absolutely is. And the speed of that rise is what makes this so critical for you to understand. Our mission today is to do a deep dive into the sources that detail this meteoric rise. And look, it wasn't a fluke. It wasn't some historical accident. It was the result of a perfect synergy. Aggressive industrial policy, protected markets, and just absolutely massive manufacturing power. China's built a leadership position that the rest of the world now finds, well, indispensable for hitting any of its net zero goals.
And we're going to start with a specific anecdote that really shows the kind of long-term vision we're talking about, the 2008 Beijing Olympics. Our research shows this campaign really started way back in 2001, but it all culminated in 2008 with China's first big foray into the industry. They rolled out a fleet of about 50 lithium-ion powered e-buses. That was the opening salvo.
Exactly. And that 2008 demonstration, it showed real commitment. But, before we talk about China winning, we have to acknowledge they didn't invent the tech.
Right.
The international foundation for these batteries goes back about 50 years to the work of Stanley Whittingham, John Goodenough, and Akira Yoshino. They, rightly shared the Nobel Prize for it in 2019.
And for a long time, Japan was the unquestioned king of this technology.
Oh, absolutely. The first commercially viable lithium-ion battery was commercialized in 1991. That was by Japan's Sony and Asahi Kasei. And for the entire next decade, Japan was number one.
By how much?
At the turn of the century, Japanese firms accounted for a staggering 93% of the global market share.
Wow, 93%.
Yeah. I mean, South Korea and others, they were trying to catch up to Japan, not to China.
So if the tech was already established and Japan was that dominant, why did Chinese policymakers think they could realistically jump into this race and win?
They saw an opportunity to, quote, leapfrog the West. They had tried for decades and, frankly, failed to become big players in conventional car manufacturing. The internal combustion engine market was just locked down.
Right, by established giants.
Exactly. Yeah. But electric vehicles, they saw that as a blank field where everybody was starting from scratch.
Yeah.
We're aiming to win not just with cheap labor, but by actually getting a technological advantage in a brand new sector.
And the commitment was just extraordinary. In 2006, China's cabinet launched this massive 15-year science and technology plan. And it specifically listed low-emission and new energy vehicles, or NEVs, and rechargeable power battery as top priorities. 15 years. That's a true long-game policy.
And what's so fascinating is when you contrast that with what was happening in the U.S. at the same time.
Yep.
I mean, in the U.S., California had launched its zero-emission vehicle program, the ZEV program, as early as 1990. It really looked like the U.S. would lead.
So what happened? Why didn't they?
Well, the efforts were constantly undermined. The car and oil companies, they lobbied California really aggressively to water down those ZEV mandates. They were pushing for hybrids or different kinds of fuel cells instead.
And then the 2008 financial crisis hit.
That was the final blow. The investment window for clean energy startups just slammed shut.
Yeah.
And this created a profound vulnerability.
A vulnerability that became China's opportunity.
Precisely. And we see this critical detail where so many promising U.S. battery companies, including A123, which had this advanced lithium-ion tech developed at MIT, they ran into financial trouble and were ultimately bought by Chinese firms. Wangxiang acquired A123 in 2013.
So they effectively took U.S.-developed IP and know-how straight into the Chinese manufacturing base.
Exactly. So while Western competitors were struggling, the path was just cleared for China to execute its strategy.
A strategy that would create this completely walled-off market. One analyst, Xian Mei, argues the success wasn't an accident. It was coordinated government support across the entire supply chain. Plus massive consumer subsidies, a rapid rollout of charging networks, and policies that just mandated that automakers make EVs.
It was a holistic push. And the scale of the financial backing was just staggering. Between 2013 and 2021 alone, the government poured 200 billion yuan. That's about $28 billion in tax rebates for these NEVs.
And once those subsidies opened up to individual buyers in 2013, it must have been a floodgate.
It was. The NEV market share jumped from a tiny 1.3% in 2015 to 41% today.
That much cash can jumpstart any industry. But the part of the strategy that seems the most aggressive, maybe the masterstroke of market capture, was the 2015 rule.
That 2015 rule, that was the real turning point. It mandated that EV makers had to use batteries from a selected government-approved list to qualify for those crucial consumer subsidies.
And let me guess what the twist was.
The twist was that all 57 companies on that government whitelist turned out to be Chinese.
Wait, hold on. They just created a government list and made sure only domestic suppliers qualified for the incentives the government was handing out. That's incredibly protectionist.
It was. The sources confirmed that it was basically walled off their massive domestic market overnight. It shut out all the foreign companies, even South Korean firms that had already invested billions and built factories in China.
So if you're a Chinese automaker and you want those subsidies,
You had to drop your foreign suppliers and switch instantly to domestic champions like CATL and BYD.
yeah.
And that policy lasted 4 years. That's more than enough time for those domestic champions to scale up without any foreign competition.
That is a brutal way to accelerate an industry. And as if isolating the market wasn't enough, they added another layer in 2017, the dual credit system.
Yes, think of the dual credit system as a mandatory environmental quota. It forced all automakers in China, domestic and foreign, to produce a certain number of EVs to get positive credits. And those credits had to balance out the negative credits they got for making conventional gasoline cars.
And if you didn't meet the quota,
Steep financial penalties.
so they were forced to make EVs. And because of the 2015 rule, to make those EVs without getting penalized, they had to use batteries from the approved domestic list. It's like a closed-loop system, just funneling demand to a few specific Chinese companies.
That's it, exactly. That combination was the perfect fertilizer for the growth of CATL and BYD.
Which brings us to what happens when you combine that protected massive market with manufacturing genius. That sudden flood of captive customers propelled CATL, which had only spun off from a Japanese-owned company in 2011,
Right.
to become the world's largest EV battery producer in 2017. They unseated Panasonic, and they've held that title ever since.
And the secret here isn't just volume, it's also structure. Top Chinese makers, especially CATL and BYD, run a highly vertically integrated business model.
So what does that actually mean? It's more than just owning the factory.
Much more. It means they often own their suppliers, fully or partly. It goes all the way down to raw materials processing.
Why does that matter so much? Beyond just securing supply.
It's all about cost, speed, and reliability. When you control the chain from the mine to the finished cell, you eliminate middleman costs, you ensure quality, and crucially, you can ramp up production or change chemistry on a dime. You aren't waiting for external partners. That control lets them build batteries cheaper, faster, and more securely than almost anyone.
But the product itself is so complex. A modern battery pack has hundreds of small cells. If one is weak, the whole chain fails.
And that's why the manufacturing expertise is the real magic. Achieving that kind of quality consistently demands massive, highly automated plants with strict process control and real-time testing. The sources suggest CATL's genius lies in scaling precision affordably. They found a way to use less money to make better batteries while maintaining a huge manufacturing capacity.
They cracked the code on scaling high-quality, cheap production at the same time.
They did.
And they didn't just stop innovating once they were on top. We have to talk about BYD's Blade battery.
The Blade battery is a perfect example of strategic innovation. It uses a different chemistry, lithium iron phosphate, or LFP.
Right, which is much cheaper because it doesn't use expensive imported cobalt,
Exactly. But traditionally, LFP meant less energy density.
meaning less range for the car.
Yes. But BYD engineered the Blade battery to be safer and much more structurally efficient. They managed to significantly improve the performance of LFP tech. This innovation made LFP a genuinely competitive option, especially for mass-market cars, and it fundamentally altered the dominant battery type in China and now globally.
It proves they're not just copycats, they're leaders in applied tech.
And underlying all of this, you have the human advantage, the sheer scale of their specialized workforce.
Our sources really stress this point about the large pool of practicing engineers.
This is a point that gets missed a lot when we just talk about subsidies. These engineers are the backbone. They aren't just, theorists with PhDs doing fundamental research, and they aren't just floor workers. They're specialized engineers who understand the entire production process intimately. They know where the bottlenecks are, how to cut costs, and how to quickly refine existing tech to win over the mass market.
So the US might have the PhDs inventing the next generation in a lab,
Yeah.
but China has thousands of skilled engineers who can take the current generation of technology and execute flawless mass production at a fraction of the cost.
That is the competitive edge. The ability to innovate rapidly on the manufacturing floor. I mean, CATL alone employs over 20,000 technical
That's
engineers.
20,000.
That's a specialized workforce that's, well, difficult, if not impossible, for competitors to replicate quickly.
The numbers alone. They almost feel like the race is already over. China dominates nearly 85% of global battery production capacity. North America is at 5%, and Europe is at 7%.
And experts agree this industrial lead is tough to replicate because of the embedded clusters and the sheer scale they've built. Their batteries are cheaper, they're high-performing, and they are available right now.
So the question becomes, can this dominance even be challenged?
That is the big question. The main hope for non-Chinese competitors seems to lie in next-generation technologies, specifically solid-state batteries.
A kind of technological reset button, something that changes the whole field.
It could be. Unlike current batteries that use a liquid electrolyte, solid-state batteries use a solid one. They promise higher energy density and greater safety. Analysts like Moki suggest that because the technology is so different, it might not require the liquid-based supply chain ecosystem that China now dominates.
A new technology could open a space for new contenders.
It could, yeah. They could scale up from scratch.
But how realistic is that? I mean, given the history we just discussed, scaling up manufacturing for any new battery tech is monumentally difficult.
It is, absolutely. And our sources point out the challenge for the U.S. specifically is immense. They face hurdles like lagging manufacturing know-how, uncertain demand from a slow shift away from gas cars, and much higher energy and labor costs.
That knowledge gap seems critical.
It is. And this all leads to a really sharp disagreement among analysts about the best way forward. Some argue that the only practical way to catch up in the near term is by actually working with Chinese companies, collaborating to gain that essential manufacturing expertise.
But others are far more skeptical.
Much more. You have voices like Taylor Ogan, who believes the 20-year lead is just unassailable. He was quoted saying the gap is so vast he cannot envision a time when another country catches up. He says they are just so much further ahead. That's a huge dose of reality for any policymaker hoping to pivot quickly.
That is a harsh assessment, but the data seems to back it up. So, to summarize the key takeaways for you, China's victory was a perfect storm. It was a synergy of strategic, long-term government intervention,
Right, that long game.
aggressive market protection, with that 2015 whitelist rule being a prime example, and the ability to combine structural efficiency, like vertical integration, with a massive skilled manufacturing capacity.
Fueled by those thousands of specialized engineers.
And that reality leads to our final provocative thought for you to consider.
Given China's near monopoly on this technology that's essential for achieving global net zero goals, this dominance raises an important strategic question for world leaders. Does a country's climate strategy now depend more on its ability to compete technologically and build its own supply chain? Or does it depend more on its diplomatic strategy, on technology cooperation, and navigating supply chain reliance with a dominant partner?
A vital question for the decades ahead. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive today. We'll see you next time.